Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. I'm George Binns, and discussion tonight will be on gun control. And to help us understand it, we have with us Stuart Gardner, attorney at law. Welcome, Stu.
Thank you.
So, gun control comes popping up every so often on the media, and it's used to be the top hot button, and Roe v. Wade has sort of taken over. So you don't hear much about it, but it's still a problem, and I guess something needs to be done about it. That's the common plea. So what do you think we ought to do for gun control?
Well, let me preface this by saying, so I have guns. I have a gun license. I am not anti-gun. I think the Second Amendment is an important part. I think the people have the right to have weapons, and I think it's an important way to make sure the government is in check. I think one of the reasons. However, that being said, I think we need a couple things. Better enforcement. I think one of the problems is everyone's like, well, there's lots of laws on the books. So the ATF, I think, is purposely weakened and unfunded. We can talk about that. I think there should be certain guns that are off limits. We've argued about this at the Y. So I don't think people need assault weapons. I think military-grade assault weapons, I think we could all agree that certain weapons, I mean, you wouldn't give someone a bazooka. You wouldn't give someone a cannon. You wouldn't allow someone a fire gun that's, the blowtorch gun that can reach 70 feet or something like that. I also think we need a better culture from the people that are selling the guns to the people that are buying the guns to believe that this is the right thing to do.
Okay. Now, what kind of a problem is that going to solve?
Oh, lots of problems. It's going to solve you've got your mass shootings. It's going to hopefully solve some gang violence. It's hopefully going to solve domestic violence. I mean, I think that we are a culture that have two problems. One is right now, as we're in lockheads with everybody. Mm-hmm. It's very aggressive right now, very acrimonious. And in the old days, you kind of settle it with your fists, which someone would get beat up and that would stink, but they would walk away to tell the tale. Mm-hmm. No one settles things with their fists anymore. They go shoot each other. I get to do other stuff. They run each other with cars and stuff like that too, but they shoot each other. That option can be taken off the table for some people. I have no problem with that.
Well, I think the problem that I find with a lot of these arguments in favor of some sort of gun control is they don't really address a specific problem. For instance, 2020, there were 45,222 deaths by firearm. 54% of them were suicides.
Yeah, I know most are suicides.
So there is a significant problem that any kind of gun control isn't going to stop it.
Oh, I disagree. Not to interrupt you.
Why?
Okay, well, we got the red flag laws. So right now, in a lot of states, someone can call up the police and say, I'm going to kill myself, and they can't stop that person from getting a gun. They can call up the police and say, I'm going to kill someone else, and they can't stop that person from getting a gun. The Second Amendment is not carte blanche to get what you want.
Yeah.
There are people on the no-fly list. We don't let them fly because we think they're terrorists. They can go out and buy machine guns. That's a no-brainer. A red flag law, a well-designed, well-written red flag law that says, the report comes in, it gets investigated, it has to have credibility. There's a cooling off period where the gun's taken away or they're not allowed to buy guns. They verify it. And then the person can get the help that they need or something like that. I think the red flag laws are a great tool, great vehicle would stop most of it. If a mother thinks a son or a father thinks a daughter or someone's going to commit suicide, my kid's going to commit suicide. There was a my research for this show, there was a show on NPR, On Point. It was all about they were talking about the ATF. And one of the stories they talked about was this woman down south that said, my son's crazy, don't let him buy a gun, he's going to kill himself. And, they called him, she went to the chief of police, she kind of did everything she could. She called the FBI, and eventually the gun dealer in the town, this is somewhere in Tennessee, was a strict Second Amendment guy. He said he can buy the gun, bought the gun, 3 days later he shot himself. So that one would have been prevented.
Yeah, well, there's a strong case to be made, and I agree with you that there should be a red flag law. There's some dicey things going on about how it gets implemented.
Sure.
Guns get taken away, and you can't get them back after you find out that, well, the guy where you wasn't as much of a threat as they said. And there was one suggestion that there ought to be a $10,000 bounty on anybody that turns somebody in. And that can be abused so damn easy by, oh, I think Sam over there is a hazard and he's got a gun, and give me the $10,000. So, again, I think the key words that you mentioned has got to be well defined and well implemented. And to the point you made earlier, that a lot of this implementation of these laws is kind of iffy. You know, the argument gets thrown around very quickly that most of the big cities you think of have very strict gun laws, and yet their murder rate is horrendous. Pick Chicago, Baltimore, Los Angeles, any of them.
Well, you know that argument doesn't hold up because the guns come in from other places. I mean, the guns...
That's the other part of the problem, that they aren't going to your neighborhood gun dealer to buy the guns. They're getting them somewhere else.
It's a culture change, and I don't know how it's going to happen. And again, I know people love their guns. They hunt with them. They practice with them. They feel safer with guns in their houses. I think that those are all reasonable uses. You know, I always point to, you know, and we were talking about this before the show. I think the hard right in this country, and we could talk. We have a show about the hard left too, which I'm not excited about either. But the hard right has lost their mind. You know, they've lost the ability to reason. You know, in the 12th century, we learned about reason, and we learned that it's not just the book you read; it's the allegory, it's the meaning you take from the book you read. And I think the Supreme Court's gone way to the far right with the Roe decision and other things. I feel like I use this as reasonableness. I think about gays in the military, and for the longest time, we didn't want them in the military. You know, it was you're not allowed to be in the military if you're gay, right? You can't come to a meeting with your partner or something like that, and you know, if you found out, they kicked you out. Then Clinton instituted Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and that was stayed for 25 or 30 years, which was okay. So they're not going to ask you, but if you want to be gay, you can be gay. And now there's gays in the military, and most of us would agree that it doesn't make a difference. They fight side by side with their fellow military people. There's really no issues. They can go to military events, military ceremonies with their partners, and it's kind of the culture has changed. Mm-hmm. I think the same thing has to happen with gun policy. It has to be, you know, gun dealers have to buy into it. You know, they have to say, okay, if there's a red flag on this person, we're not going to sell it to them. We can't sell you this right away because of these issues, and it has to be.
Yeah, well, that's a reasonable way to do it. And I think that a lot of the problem, however, keeps coming down to that one or two incidents get blown out of proportion, and next thing you know, you got one of these blanket edicts that you can't do this. And you mentioned earlier military assault weapons. You can't buy a military assault weapon.
They can buy the what's the gun that the
AR-15.
The AR-15s.
AR-15 was designed to be a military weapon. It didn't make the grade. Air Force would not accept it. Now, in the part of that design, there were some good features in flexibility. Those flexibility features have been implemented in the military weapons, the M4 carbine or the M16 rifle. Those are the current military weapons. The big difference is, depending upon which branch of service you're in, you can get an M4 or an M16 that can be switched to fully automatic, or it can be switched to burst fire, which means it'll let you fire 3 rounds on one pull of the trigger.
Yep.
Those are the military weapons. You can't buy one of those.
Yeah.
You can beg, borrow, or steal one, but you can't buy one. So it's not an issue. And the other one that bothers me is all this hype about what's an assault weapon? Well, if I take a brick and slap you upside the head, that's assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, right?
Yeah,
the word assault does not really define a class of weapons as much as it defines an action.
agree and disagree. It depends if you give that person the tools to quickly and efficiently take out people. I mean, the NRA's argument that the only way you're going to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun completely fell apart in Uvalde, Texas. From what I understand, and this is Texas, where they love guns and they're tough and all this kind of stuff. You had 20 guys with weapons standing outside that couldn't go in or afraid to go in or whatever the truth that comes out, but they were standing outside while some kid was inside killing kids. So, George, something has to change.
Yeah.
Now, and I think the recent legislation that the Democrats and Republicans agreed on, which is really rare that they agreed on something that just the Biden signed into law, I think it's a great start. I think, again, I'm okay. I'm great with the red flag laws. I'm not familiar enough with different types of bigger weapons, faster round weapons to kind of define it. But I'd put experts in a room and I'd say, which weapons can we, which weapons would we, and it would be a vote afterwards, but which weapons can we allow the population to have and which weapons can we not allow the population to have? And I think that's a fine thing to do. I mean, I know, you get hate mail. No, but you're not going to get rid of rifles. You're not going to get rid of handguns. You're not going to get rid of, something that's a little bit higher than that, but you are going to get rid of whatever the most dangerous weapons are.
Well, any weapon can be dangerous. Give you, for instance, you brought up Texas. Well, the cops totally blew it. And it's not the local police, it's the school police that should have gone in there. And depending on which story you read, it's either an off-duty border agent that went in and popped the bad guy, or the SWAT team finally got him. But taking the attitude that this is what the results seem to be from the analysis of that incident, the leader of the cops, chief, decided he didn't have enough horsepower, manpower, gunpower, whatever, to go in and take them down. And he couldn't get the keys to get in there. So this kind of soft stuff, but somebody eventually did. Take another incident in Duncanville, Texas, Monday, this week. Guy walks into a school that's being used for a day camp for the kids with a gun, and he gets stopped by one of the staff, and he tries to break in. The doors are locked. The cops are there in 2 minutes. They dropped him. So, you can say, based on one Texas incident, it didn't work. I can just as easily say, based on another Texas incident, it worked. And maybe it's got the message out to everybody that, hey, the total screw up in Uvalde has got to be fixed. You can't do that. If you're going to be protecting the school, then you damn well better protect the school. Either that or get the hell out of there and get another job. I mean, it's got to come down to that if you're going to be the protector of the school, you got to go where the gunfire is and do something about it.
Yeah. It kind of seems to me, George, we're almost on the same page.
Oh, I know.
I just, I think, again, I just don't like hiding behind the Constitution. What the elimination of Roe v. Wade said is it's conservatives are like, oh, we want to strictly interpret the Constitution, until they want to not interpret the Constitution. They want to strictly interpret it the way they want it. It's a document that was made 250 years ago that has to be brought current with the times. Yeah. I'm sure the founding fathers did not want to let everyone have a gun that wanted a gun. The text itself says a well-regulated militia. I got no problem. We have the technology, we have the resources, we just need the will. You asked me, like, what do we need? We need a culture change and the will. And the culture change doesn't have to be get rid of guns. The culture change has to be guns should be, and I get it, most people that have guns don't commit crimes, good guys keep guns and all that kind of stuff, but the culture change has to be through people that sell guns and people that are willing to sell guns to anybody. And I blame the hard right for pushing the free for all. I can put lots of blame on the hard left for other things, but I blame the hardcore of your party.
Well, it's not my party. I've been an independent since Eisenhower, so I learned quickly.
Eisenhower was a good president.
Yes.
I wasn't around.
But you start looking at a lot of these incidents, and you find out there's a common thread in them. You can go back to the assassination attempt on Reagan, and this incident in Uvalde, Texas, and the one in Duncanville, Texas. In all three of those cases, and many more of them, the perpetrator had a mental problem.
Yeah.
And in the case of John Hinckley, he was being treated with tranquilizers. And after the assassination attempt, they did a thorough analysis on him, and he was a dangerous character.
Yep.
He had serious problems. And fortunately, he got a lot of help while he was in the mental hospitals, and they let him loose finally, saying, hey, he's cured.
Yeah.
And both these other two cases in Texas, there was mental problems and nothing was done about him.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, is where the problem is falling down. That people with problems get identified and, that's he's a bad guy. And next thing you know, they've got a gun and they're off doing something. In the case of the first case in Texas, kid went out and bought 2 AR-15s, 18-year-old kid. And in the second case, he was already on a watch list that could not have a gun because of a prior conviction, and he took the gun away from his wife. So it's got to be something stronger than, oh, that's not nice, you can't have a gun. I mean, people have got to be treated, they've got to be worked with, and they've got to be watched. If you get somebody identified, it's not just, oh, that was nice, we identified him, and walk away.
Yeah.
You got to stay on his case.
I think half the country is on some mood-altering drug, George, at some time or another. So I think we're in big trouble there.
But
go ahead, please.
No, go ahead.
I just, again, I think we're on the same page, but it doesn't seem to me like what upsets me is the hiding behind this language of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment does not unfettered access to weapons. The Second Amendment says you can have a gun, right?
Yeah.
Right? And I think the culture at the ATF, I mean, I did all this research on the ATF. They're the bureau that's charged with gun enforcement. They're underfunded. They talked about how, I've got some numbers here, since 1970, the DEA has had a 250% increase in funds and people. The FBI's had a 90% increase. And this is since 1970. There's only been a 40% increase in the ATF. So the people that are regulating the guns, the people that are trying to enforce the laws we have out there, are intentionally weakened because of the belief that it should not be regulated, and that has to change. The stranglehold of whoever it is, whether it's the NRA or the hard right, people have to say, look, we have to allow for reasonable limitations on people having guns, and I think you're okay with that. I wrote this article one time, and I talked about the First Amendment right to protest. And I said, yeah, it's great that it's in the Constitution, but it has to be the police officer in the corner or the FBI agent or the military guy that's gonna not stop you from speaking because he or she has to believe that you have that right. So the people that are enforcing these laws or people that are pushing the ATF have to believe that they're reasonable and it's okay to take guns away from people that don't deserve guns.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would disagree with that, but where I'd get off the bus is when you identify somebody, you got to stay with it.
Yeah.
And you got to stay on their case, and they're not doing that.
Yeah.
And the media keeps coming up with these grandiose solutions that really don't fix the problem. Because as we had a discussion in the Y one day, you were suggesting that, okay, we won't let anybody have an AR-15. Well, what's so magic about an AR-15? It's a varmint gun.
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of states that won't let you use it for hunting because it's considered cruel and unusual punishment to the animals. There are states that have restrictions on what you can do with it. So it's not the terror weapon that the media makes it out to be. And it's overly focused on that when in reality we have a needle in a haystack problem. There's 1 or 2 or 3 really loose cannons in the world, and they've got to be identified and done something. You don't go looking for a needle in a haystack with a pitchfork, and you don't burn the haystack down. You maybe get a magnet and go in and very carefully look for it. And I think this is what the problem is. You've got to go in to the situation, and when somebody gets identified, you've got to really do your homework on that person and find out, are they really a danger? Are they close to causing a problem? Or is it just an incident, a local event?
I mean, I agree and disagree. I mean, I'll take some heat for this, but, I coined a term one time, tyranny of the individual. We are so focused on individual rights in this country. And again, I support them all. But we're so focused on individual rights, we'll let someone else, like, as you said, tear up half the world because we're protecting the individual rights. And that's the culture change, too. I mean, I don't... It seems to me like you and me can agree on this show, but no one else in the world can agree on anything.
I know. And I think it comes down to exactly that, is the left and the right have split. And they're farther and farther to their extremes. And the net result is, and I've used this before, there's nobody in the middle willing to make a compromise and work to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Both extremes like to scream, yell, and holler with their favorite mantra. And most cases, what they're screaming and hollering about won't fix anything.
Yeah, it seems like a common thread about our shows that we do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's where it comes down to. And I always like John Hightower's comment that the only thing you find in the middle of the road is a yellow stripe and a dead armadillo.
Yeah.
Which implies that you don't want to compromise. It's my way or the highway. There's no way in between. There's no option in between.
Well, I mean, we've talked about how to do this. Term limits.
Yeah.
I think it's going to get worse because I think and again, I don't. Everyone thinks that there was some master plan. It was just Donald Trump being able to put 3 conservatives on the Supreme Court, 3 young conservatives. And they're willing to kind of let the states do it, and the states are controlled by people that, are far, as far right as Texas or Alabama is going to go, just as far left as Vermont and Massachusetts and New York are going to go, and California. So what are we supposed to do? Go back? Are we supposed to start some sort of virtual civil war?
Well, we're back to the fundamental question how this country was set up as a democratic republic. Each one of the states is an independent entity. And you go back to the title, the United States of America. It's not America, it's the United States of. So this whole question about states' rights gets dragged into it because you get the situation that the middle of the country, the flyover country, doesn't want to be controlled by either coast.
I think... Sometimes I agree with it. Sometimes I'm like, let's split up. Maybe more like a confederacy, right? And then I worry sometimes, and I say that certain federal standards are important. I mean, do we want to allow, Alabama to stop teaching mathematics and evolution in their schools and stop teaching science? I mean, do we want a whole generation of people? And I'm not saying Massachusetts is so great and Alabama is so bad. So if you're from Alabama, I'm sure it's a great state. Just pick on some other state, please. Don't no hate mail. But I mean, do we want to allow like some sort of ridiculous things from some states? Even you can make a ridiculous thing from some liberal state. Do we want to allow California to go communist and be like, you can't own private property in California. Yeah. I think that federal standards are important, and I think that without them, we end up going to war with each other.
Well, that's why we've got a Congress and a Senate.
No, they don't do anything.
Okay, now you're down to the fundamental problem that too many of the politicians spend all their time raising money for their next campaign.
Yeah.
And the net result is what gets done in the meantime is...
We need a show on how to fix these things. And how do we fix them? Does it start by term limits? Can we take money? I mean, I forget who it was. They wanted to take money out of politics and have, federally funded elections. Yeah. I mean, can we do that? Is that going to do anything? I mean, I don't... no one wants to do this. Why would you give up job security if you're a congressman and you've got a 98% chance of being reelected or something like that, and all you really need to do is just get elected? Would you do that? I mean, just keep.
Well, I mean, that's the whole basis of the Constitution. The assumption behind it is that, like Washington, he became president, did his 2 terms, and he went home. He refused the 3rd term.
Yeah.
I mean, there was an integrity in his character.
The peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah, and it was Cincinnatus, I guess, is the example of the Roman general that went off to fight the war. The war's over. We went back to the farm and plowed the fields again.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what Washington did. And I think that's the kind of an attitude that is basic assumptions built in that disappeared. And if we got to the point of saying that the president is good for 2 terms and that's it, it ought to be everybody.
100%. I am 100% behind that. Make it happen.
Yeah, so we're almost into the second show. But yeah, but that's really what it comes down to. And I think this whole issue of gun control is one of a phony issue that it's really not a problem as much as lack of really good psychiatric treatment for people that got real problems, because they're the ones that are causing it. And then we got the gang wars. That's another issue.
Yeah.
That's totally different.
Start with good psychiatric treatment right here, George.
Yes. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining with us. And as you can tell, this thing gets a little bit exciting, and we like to do it again. And as usual, if you have a different opinion or a similar opinion and you'd like to express it, we make room for you at the table. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned.